Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is part 2 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2011. As usual, we have already completed our coverage of all of the stink bombs from this year. That was back in part 1. And the best films from this year will be saved for part 3, the next video. So this part is going to cover films that range from merely watchable to pretty good, in my opinion. All of the films tonight have flaws, of course, but most films have flaws anyways. So the relevant question is essentially this. Do any of these films sound interesting to you? Well, that's what I'm here for. So hopefully, one or two of them will pique your interest. So let's begin. And as always, titles for all of the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. Alright, first film tonight is a blind buy I had from Japan when I was visiting Japan a few years ago. I think it was maybe the 5th time I was there, I don't remember. But it's from 2011, and that is The New World You Didn't Know, also known as Shin Anata no Shiranai Sekai, a Japanese horror anthology. Now this is a made-for-television anthology of 4 short films, with a total runtime of 47 minutes. Now, I believe this was, again, a blind buy purchase from a prior Japanese vacation. The first segment is called Sin and Trap. It's 15 minutes long. This one is about a jealous girl who finds out that her boyfriend is cheating on her. So she promptly poisons his lover. Unfortunately for her, the woman's spirit is not pleased. So this little film is flawed, with some subpar acting at times. That seemed to be the thing that popped out at me. The ending is cool, though. It is cool, and it helps to make it worth watching. Again, a 15-minute short, it's stuck its ending, so I say it's worth watching. Second segment is called Hair. This one's only 9 minutes long. So a series of killings occur around a university campus. After realizing that her best friend's hair is nearly identical to the murderer on the loose, our protagonist attempts to save her boyfriend from impending doom. So yet again, this movie's a bit dodgy, but is saved by its ending, which is pretty interesting. Third segment is called Last Love Letter Faded. This is 13 minutes long. It's about a teenage girl who is a book committee member at school. She has a secret crush on a classmate, but never really talks to him. Meanwhile, a mysterious book in the library holds a secret. So this does not have a memorable ending, unlike the other ones we covered, but it really didn't need one because it's actually pretty decent overall. One reason for this, I think, is because Ai Hashimoto is the lead actress, and she's easily the best actress to appear in this anthology. So you get an upgrade of acting in this particular segment. Story here is like a faded romance vibe to it. Not scary, but it's decent. And then the final segment is called Do Not Look In. It's 10 minutes long. 2 teenage girls hang out at home, but a peeping Tom is in the neighborhood. So again, there's some nice little surprises in this, and the surprises are actually spaced out over the 10 minutes. It doesn't just occur at the end. Some unexpected moments, I think, and I liked it. So this short anthology is decent, but you don't really have to worry about seeking it out because you're not really missing a whole lot if you don't see it. Also, at the current price point, the DVD is overpriced when considering the 47-minute runtime. And I say that because the availability of this one is that it is only available on Region 2 Japanese DVD without subs. So, our next one tonight is called Possession in Japan. Okay, this is obviously a Japanese horror film. So after a young woman becomes possessed by a demonic spirit, a priest arrives to perform an exorcism. Now this young, pretty girl reaches about 20 years of age and begins to suffer from an unusual phenomenon that turns her face more diabolical day by day. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, she undergoes treatment but gets steadily worse. Indeed, she's possessed by a devil and is set to face a deadly fight with evil spirits. So this is a direct-to-video film that's only about 80 minutes long. I don't have really a whole lot to say about this one. The premise is obviously cliched and represents something we've seen many times before, going all the way back to the 70s. Pacing is also a bit on the slow side. Even for an 80-minute film, it does feel kind of slow. But the overall quality, I think, is pretty good here. The acting and special effects are, they are a bit of a mixed bag, but generally good. The highlight of the entire film is a rather unexpected scene that takes place during the second half, which I won't spoil for you. So there are a few highlights to this movie. The director here is a man by the name of Kotaro Terauchi, who previously directed Carved 2, The Scissors Massacre back from 2008. And that was actually a really good movie, in my opinion, but he was just unable to duplicate that level of quality in Possession in Japan. Still, though, I found it to be watchable. Now, the availability of this one is that it is actually widely available on DVD. All right, our next one here, I think, is maybe a slight step above the two that we just covered. And it is a part of a franchise we've been covering in this playlist, and that is Aiko Aiko Azarak, the first episode of Misa Kuroi. From Japan again, we're sticking to Japan here for now. This is an entry in the Kojuncha project, in which 3 of Japan's foremost horror manga creators wrote and directed films based on their own works. We've already reviewed Horror Mansion The Blinds in part 1 of this video. That one wasn't too good. But fortunately, this entry is more entertaining. Koja Shinichi, known as a leading figure in supernatural manga, takes on one of his best-known creations in Aiko Aiko Azarak, which has been adapted for film and television many times. This is actually the 7th film in the franchise, and we've reviewed 5 of the previous 6 titles in this Asian horror playlist. The only one we missed was B-Page, mostly because it's almost impossible to find. I did manage to see R-Page, which was like a companion film to B-Page, but that one was not particularly good, so I don't think we're missing much of anything by missing B-Page, since, it was a companion piece to a film that really was not very good. In any case, what's the plot of the first episode of Misa Kuroi? Well, a crisis occurs at a high school and students fall prey to black magic. Their classmate, our protagonist, attempts to stop them by battling the dark forces with magic that has been passed down in her family for generations. So I mentioned previously that the first 3 Aiko Aiko Azarak films had like a cinematic quality to them. And they feel like films that could have been released in cinemas, and I think were. That's not the case with Awakening, the 4th film, and R-Page, the 5th film, which were direct-to-video and had extremely cheap production values. The first episode of Misa Kuroi is also a low-budget film, but it makes an admirable attempt to be, creative and memorable, and is mostly successful despite its budget limitations. It does kind of have a cheesy tone to it at times, though, and it does have low-grade special effects, but it's also quite odd and contributes some fun visuals. For example, let's take an example here. There's a demonic tree at one point that captures a handful of schoolgirls. There's a bizarre backstory of the protagonist's parents that were touched on, and a hilarious humanoid spider scene to enjoy. Yeah, so there's some fun stuff in this. Unlike some of the other later Aiko Aiko Azarak films from recent years that were released during like the 2000s, the bad ones that I mentioned, there is quite a bit of witchcraft in this one, which is obviously a good thing. This series went away from the witchcraft angle, and I don't know why, because that's the whole point of the series, I was definitely relieved to see this franchise kind of go back to its roots a little bit in that sense, even though it wasn't as visceral or horrific as the first few films. Runtime is only 60 minutes. We're dealing with some short runtimes today, and I think that helps to make a film watchable because it doesn't have to do quite as much to hold your interest. This was titled the first episode, but it does have its own self-contained story, and it does not rely on a second episode to wrap things up, so you can feel free to watch this without having to worry about it. I don't think there were any other films released related to this one anyways. Horror elements, as I said, kind of on the light side, not much gore or visceral scares, but some good atmosphere at times and is a fun watch overall, so I would recommend that you watch the original Aiko Aiko Azarak trilogy from the 90s, then skip the other installments from the 2000s and go right to this one for your 4th experience. So, availability of this one is that it is unbelievably widely available on DVD. You may not have even have heard of this film. In fact, I only discovered this one recently over the past year or so. All right, our next one is, wow, this one's, I got a lot to say about this one. It's enjoyable, but man, it could have been great, and it isn't. And that is Sector 7, a South Korean horror thriller film. On an oil rig platform in the middle of the ocean, located south of Jeju Island, a woman played by Ji Won-ha, she previously starred in Phone, by the way, an excellent horror film, works as the equipment manager for a small but dedicated crew. Joining the crew is a former colleague of our protagonist's late father, and now newly assigned captain of the platform's underwater exploratory ship Eclipse. Though his job is to oversee the withdrawal of the platform, he suggests conducting some last drillings, and after 3 weeks of preparation, our protagonist and another crew member dive underwater to work on part of the platform. But while performing their work, her partner sinks into the abyss due to an equipment failure. So when she gets back on the platform, more crew members start to die off in mysterious ways. What they soon learn is that an underwater monster has come aboard the oil rig platform and is feeding on them. So the first time I watched Sector 7, it proved to be a watchable disappointment. The problem was that I saw the 60-second teaser trailer, which made this out to be a very serious sci-fi horror film that was taking inspiration from the first Alien film back in 1979. I think they even used the same self-destruct warning as Alien in the teaser. And in recent years, we've seen South Korea take inspiration from other films from other countries and make some fantastic stuff. So going into this movie, I was stoked. Alien's in my top 10 films of all time, so I wasn't expecting it to be that phenomenal, but I was expecting this to be pretty freaking good. But those expectations proved to be a big problem when confronted with Sector 7's goofy comedy, uneven performances, and occasionally awful special effects. So after a brief introduction, we see our protagonists in action as they work together to stop a potentially dangerous leak. Pretty good opening. But then we're subjected to that cheesy comedy that I was talking about. Even after watching this a second time recently and knowing that the comedy was coming, it still did not work all that well. There's a bit of team building there, I will admit, but it's not particularly well written. Even worse, a few of the supporting cast members overacted badly in this, which resulted in a few obnoxious characters. This is something that South Korea usually does a good job of avoiding. You know what I mean? But it crept up in this one. There's one guy who seemed like he had some kind of mental illness. I mean, not a problem per se in a film, but it becomes a problem when he's manning potentially dangerous oil rig equipment. It was completely out of place. Director should have reined him in a bit more and made him a more normal kind of character. He was just kind of goofy and just mentally unstable. Why would you have this guy on an oil rig platform? But with that said, there were some performances that I did enjoy, and they're most of the main performances. So I did like Ji Won-ha in this. She's brash, stubborn, tough, and scorching hot, too. It must have been the short hair. I've never seen her this attractive before, and she's a gorgeous woman. So I really like her. She brings attitude to the movie, and it helps you get through it. Sung Ki-an is also here, a veteran actor who is always welcome. And we also have Yi Ryun Cha, probably butchered that name, who appeared in Whispering Corridors 4 Voice. So it was nice to see her here as well. So yes, some of the acting by the supporting actors is pretty bad, but the leads are good, and that helps to carry you through it. Special effects range from pretty good to terrible. The monster itself is kind of cool looking, at least in terms of its design. It has some similarities to like The Host from 2006, but it's quite different as well. I kind of like the monster design, but you can almost always tell that it's CGI. They didn't use much physical effects in this. The worst shots, though, in the entire film are the ones involving motorcycles, because the green screen effects are terrible. It looks really bad at times. They actually ride the motorcycles on the oil rig for like recreation, and actually during some of the action scenes, but some of the scenes involving the motorcycles are good regardless, but if you hold special effects quality to a high standard and that's important to you, this one's going to be tough to sit through. And since we're knocking out flaws, I must say that the script is kind of bare bones. There are some monster movie cliches, and the earlier death scenes are disappointing, but there are some pretty good deaths later on, so that's something to look forward to. The final showdown is actually surprisingly fun, and does have some legitimate tension and excitement, because the monster is very difficult to kill, so much so that it's hard to predict how our protagonists are going to kill it. But with all that said, I found Sector 7 to be easily consumable monster movie trash. It is. Despite its flaws, I really have no problem sitting through this movie, and I actually find it to be quite entertaining. It's a cheesy, brainless popcorn film that proves to be surprisingly watchable, especially during the second half. And it appears that many people seem to agree with me on this because, almost inexplicably, it does have a good number of positive reviews online. So, if you like monster movies, check out Sector 7. Just don't expect anything that's of a particularly high quality. Just be prepared for some monster movie trash. And Sector 7 is widely available. Alright, our next one here. It's a pretty interesting one. We stay in South Korea, and we have Ghastly. After his sister and brother-in-law die in a nasty murder-suicide, a man adopts the nephew and moves into the house with his wife and her younger sister. So the problem here is that this little boy engages in some seriously nasty behavior behind the scenes that may be linked to his shaman grandmother. Can this family unit survive long enough to figure out what exactly is tormenting the boy? Well, we're going to find out. So this is a fairly strong opening scene, I think. It's got some bloody violence and an intriguing setup. And thankfully, it does cash in on its premise because the kid here is a vicious, manipulative, menacing little dirtbag. One interesting element, though, is that the film will occasionally introduce other unlikable children into the mix that butt heads with our antagonist, and it provides situations where you're almost actually rooting for the kid to do something to these kids. So there's a little bit of a bloodlust aspect to it as well. But you will want to see this kid get his comeuppance, if it's even his fault. You know what I mean? As I mentioned earlier, though, there is some bloody violence to this, mostly focusing on dream sequences, knife attacks, dismemberment, and even violence against children. There's also a focus on internal conflict within the family, and it does raise the tension sufficiently. On the negative side, though, the editing feels a bit rushed at times here. That's a problem because the movie feels amateuristic when that happens. It kind of just, it fades out at like the wrong times. Feels like the timing of the fade outs and cuts are just a little off here at times. Dream sequences also get a bit repetitive and are somewhat cheap as a scare tactic. And finally, the ending is a bit predictable. Regardless, though, Ghastly is a briskly paced and easily consumable horror flick that is only 77 minutes long. A major rarity for South Korea. You don't get many films at 77 minutes over there. But again, a theme tonight that I'm just noticing now as I'm going through this. A lot of shorter runtime films. We have another one. Well, first, let's see what the availability is for Ghastly here. It is moderately available on DVD. All right, our next film here is a Japanese film going back to Japan with The Mountain Incident, also known as Chichibu Demon. So the staff of a film production company encounter the unknown while investigating the folklore and dark tales of Chichibu. Our protagonists are attempting to capture some scary paranormal activity on film, but they may get more than what they bargained for. This documentary-style film is similar in ways to the Blair Witch Project and Kuroi. While not nearly as awesome as those titles, don't laugh at me, Blair Witch Project is awesome. It does execute the first-person perspective well. It also explores the Onibi, or Will-o'-the-Wisps yokai legend, which look like floating fireballs in the air. So the Mountain Incident is only 62 minutes long, but it's still a bit slow in spots. That's mostly due to the high level of dialogue. In terms of content, it does not offer much of anything new outside of the Onibi phenomena, which does not appear often in Japanese film. This is a familiar experience, you know what I mean? But it is on the creepy side and is sufficiently well acted. I also like the subtle, ominous score that they lay on it. I think your enjoyment of this film is really going to depend on whether or not you're a fan of these documentary style or found footage horror films. If you're a fan, you may want to check it out. If you're not a fan, you may want to skip it because it doesn't really distinguish itself as being an all-time great or one that could change your mind and convert you to this type of horror film. This is one of the more generally well-made films that we're going to cover tonight, though. It's not as eventful as something like a Sector 7 or a Ghastly, but it's more consistent in its overall quality. It doesn't have any really big flaws to it in terms of just, acting or anything like that. So yes, I do recommend The Mountain Incident, and it is streaming on YouTube but without subtitles. Alright, so we're down to our last two tonight. One from South Korea and one from Japan. And the one from South Korea is called The Cat. No, it's not the one from 1992 that I covered earlier in this playlist. That movie was phenomenal. At least as a piece of entertainment. Check out my review of The Cat from 92. It's just outrageous. But anyways, this is The Cat from 2011, and it's from South Korea. So after its master dies of mysterious causes, a cat finds a new home with a young woman. So Young is an animal groomer who works in a pet shop, but also suffers from claustrophobia. So one day she gets stuck with a Persian cat named Silky. From then on, she is constantly haunted by a bobbed-haired girl with green cat eyes who turns her life into turmoil. She desperately seeks help from people around, but no one listens to her, of course. The presence of the girl and the sound of Silky's cries start to choke in around her life more and more. Not only that, but the people around her get killed one at a time. Wow, that's pretty generic, isn't it? Pretty generic premise. But this has kitty cats, one of which is named Silky. So there are a handful of interesting themes in this film. There's claustrophobia, there's animal abuse, there's tragedy, etc. The claustrophobia angle is emphasized the most, and our protagonist is placed in a few situations condition comes into play. However, in terms of overall style, again, very generic. In fact, it's probably the biggest flaw of this film. Some of the scares are commonplace. The dead bodies could have been imported from Ringu. The ending is very cliched. And when you see it, you may very well shake your head in disbelief. They really should have thought of something else for the ending in this film. But, to be fair, there is one thing that this movie has that is different from a lot of Asian horror films. It uses cats. Lots and lots of cats. Not only that, it portrays them in a variety of ways. Cute, vulnerable, and even scary. Definitely a lot of kitty shots in this, and I found that to be enjoyable. You also get the typical bells and whistles of good quality South Korean horror. A likable lead actress with a good performance, high production values in this one, which is not something we've had that much tonight so far, and some effectively creepy atmosphere at times. I like the way it's set up its shots, and it's kind of creepy. Visuals are nice and professionally made. It is a moderately entertaining affair, I think. So, basically, here's my advice for this one. Do the cliches of Asian ghost films really irritate you? If so, you could probably skip The Cat. If they don't irritate you, then go ahead and check it out. It's pretty good. And The Cat is widely available on DVD. Alright, we're on our last film already tonight? Man, I'm ripping through this. Alright, this is probably the best film of the evening, and it's quite a bit different, too. And that is Tomio from Japan. Not to be confused with Tomie. That's a completely different franchise. So, Tomio is another entry. It's the third entry in the Kojuncha project, in which 3 of Japan's foremost horror manga directors wrote and directed films based on their own works. So Ito Junji, creator of Tomie, ironically, Uzumaki and many other works that have been made into films, adapts his own manga for the screen here. So one day, a young man named Tomio visits the house of a fortune teller with his girlfriend. There he meets a woman and succumbs to her seduction. Tomio feels as if he is dreaming, but the woman has designs on his head, so to speak. Excuse me. So this film begins with our protagonist, who enters a doctor's office with a bizarre, nasty neck condition. His wound looks so painful, it looks like somebody slit his throat, but his head is still attached. Props to the makeup crew on that one, because it looked painful. The story then shifts to flashback mode regarding his visit to the fortune teller and the subsequent horrors. Perhaps a bit slow at the start, but it moves efficiently enough to set everything up and gets more entertaining as it progresses. As a viewer, you can understand this character's decision-making because he's hoping that there's some kind of medical answer for this condition. Also, the reaction of the doctors is also somewhat understandable. There's nothing here that's particularly visceral, gory, or frightening, although, as I said, the wound is a bit cringeworthy. But it does go to some unexpected territories and is enjoyably creepy in spots, and even a bit demented. There are some witchcraft elements at play, as well as a bit of black humor. So, again, this one's only 60 minutes long, so it's an easy sit, and I think it's a pretty cool flick. Tomio's pretty good. Probably the best of the 3 films in this Kujincho project, or Kojuncha project. And Tomio is widely available on DVD. You may have never heard of that one, so it's kind of surprising that it's widely available. So tonight, we got some cliches chucked in, films with flaws, some that are a bit different, like Tomio, and, hey, if any of these sounded interesting to you, check them out. And, of course, the next part will be the best films of 2011. You're probably thinking, the best films probably aren't that great, and I didn't mention that in part 1, but I already watched a few of them, and they held up. In fact, one of them is actually surprisingly good, and at least one of them. I have a few more to rewatch. So be sure to join me for part 3, because we got some interesting stuff in that video. And as always, I will see you next time.